bad things happen to good people.
Right.
That's just a stark, undeniable fact of life, isn't it? We all see it, we experience it. But have you ever really stopped to wonder why? I mean, really dig deep into the cause. What if the answer isn't just, a simple moral failing? What if it's something far more profound, something that challenges one of our most fundamental beliefs about humanity itself? What if our whole understanding of good and evil has been, well, incomplete, maybe even dangerously naive?
It is a profoundly unsettling question. It really is. Because, our natural inclination, I think, is to seek comfort. Comfort in the idea that deep down, people are basically good.
Right. We want to believe that.
Exactly. We want to believe that evil, real malevolence is just an anomaly, a deviation from the norm. But today, we're doing a deep dive into an extraordinary and, yeah, I have to say, profoundly unsettling work. It's Andrew M. Lobaczewski's Political Ponerology, a science on the nature of evil.
And this isn't just some theoretical book. It's presented as a scientific treatise, but one born from unimaginable suffering and really rigorous observation.
That context is so crucial. Lobaczewski, he was a Polish psychologist, lived through these absolute hellscapes under both the Nazis and then the communist regimes.
Wow. Both.
Both. And the book isn't just presented as a study, it's framed as a chronicle of a descent into hell, transformation, and triumphant return to the world with knowledge of that hell that was priceless for the rest of us.
Think about that phrase. Priceless knowledge gained from hell. It tells you the weight of this.
Absolutely. And he wasn't alone. He worked with this clandestine group, other courageous scientists, undertaking incredibly perilous research. They were trying to understand the actual origins of large-scale societal evil, often at immense personal risk.
You mentioned risk. What kind are we talking about?
Lobaczewski himself talks about losing his research papers multiple times, enduring secret arrests, even being forced into emigration. I mean, real, tangible danger.
Yet he kept going.
He persisted, driven by this urgent need for a scientific, a naturalistic understanding of evil. Because the conventional wisdom, the moral explanations, they just weren't cutting it. They didn't explain what he and his colleagues were seeing firsthand.
And that's really our mission with this deep dive, isn't it? To try and extract the most critical insights from this difficult material. We want to help you, our listener, gain a scientific, maybe even a clinical, a naturalistic understanding of evil. Moving beyond those traditional, often purely moralistic takes that, let's be honest, can leave us feeling pretty helpless or just confused.
Yeah, bewildered is a good word for it sometimes.
This dive, it's probably going to challenge some of your perceptions. Yeah. It offers a startling, maybe even uncomfortable new lens to view not just history, but also, current events happening right now.
Definitely prepare to have some deeply held beliefs. Well, maybe shattered. As the author himself describes his own really agonizing journey, he talks very vividly about this painful realization that certain ideas he held as sacred, ideas about human beings that many of us still hold, well, in his own words, they were just false.
False. That's a strong word.
It is. And it's a journey that speaks right to the core of what we think we know about ourselves, about society, about how things work.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack this shattering premise, this fundamental reevaluation of human nature. Lobaczewski starts Political Ponerology with a really candid admission, doesn't he? He says he once held what he now calls a naive belief. He believed that the vast majority of people want to do good, to experience good things, think good thoughts, and make decisions with good results. He even adds, and they try with all their might to do so.
And for most of us listening, that probably sounds, well, pretty reasonable, right? Maybe even comforting. It feels like a universal truth.
It absolutely does. It's such a common, deeply ingrained assumption. It shapes how we expect people to behave, how we set up our laws, our ideas about justice.
We assume, that even people who do terrible things are somehow redeemable, or maybe their actions just stem from misunderstanding, or perhaps a temporary lapse, a moment of weakness.
But Lobaczewski's research, especially his clinical work with individuals showing signs of psychopathy, it just forced this painful disillusionment on him.
Yeah, he states it very starkly, that belief, that core assumption. It's not true, full stop.
Wow.
And he says this was a discovery made to our sorrow, as they say, but we also learned to our edification. Meaning, yeah, it was incredibly painful to realize, but ultimately it was enlightening. It opened his eyes.
And this wasn't just academic for him. He felt this on a deeply personal level, didn't he? Which gives the work this raw, urgent feeling.
Exactly. He reveals that this fundamental misunderstanding, this naivete about universal human goodness, it actually left him vulnerable. He says it made him a victim of a psychopath.
So he experienced it directly.
Directly. This isn't just theory from a textbook. It underscores the critical importance of understanding what he later called the cold hand of evil. It's like a warning, born from his own painful experience, about the danger of just assuming everyone else thinks and feels the way we do.
That foundational shift feels absolutely crucial then, because if we operate assuming everyone's basically good,
Then our strategies are flawed from the start. Our approaches to conflict, to injustice, to figuring out historical atrocities, they'll be fundamentally wrong.
because we're misinterpreting motivations.
Exactly. We apply our own internal moral compass, our own sense of guilt or empathy, to people who simply do not possess one. It's like trying to navigate dense fog with a map that's just missing huge landmarks.
You're trying to appeal to a conscience that isn't even there.
Or reason with someone whose basic logic operates on entirely different principles. You're speaking different languages.
Okay, so if not everyone is basically good, if that belief is not true, then who are these others, these people who are so radically different? Lobaczewski uses this chilling thought experiment to introduce the concept. He asks you to imagine someone who pretends that the concept of responsibility is unknown to you.
Yeah. Except as a burden, others seem to accept without question, like a gullible fool. Just think about that phrasing. Responsibility seen as foolishness.
It's already disturbing, seeing our sense of duty as a weakness.
And then he adds another layer. Imagine you also have the ability to conceal from other people that your psychological makeup is radically different from theirs.
So hiding in plain sight.
Effortlessly. Because most of us just assume conscience is universal. So if you don't have it, hiding that fact is, well, it's almost automatic. It's the perfect camouflage in a world that takes conscience for granted.
And the defining trait here, according to Lobaczewski, is exactly that, the complete, profound absence of conscience.
Yes. He says you are not held back from any of your desires by guilt or shame, and you are never confronted by others for your cold-hearted actions.
There's no internal break, no mechanism that, as the text puts it, beats up on us, emotionally speaking, when we make a choice we view as immoral, unethical, neglectful, or selfish.
Right. Most of us feel a pang of guilt over something tiny, like eating the last cookie. Imagine feeling nothing when deliberately hurting someone, destroying their reputation, or even their life.
It's hard to wrap your head around, and the numbers he mentions are alarming. Sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder. He says it's alarmingly high.
Yeah, the text suggests a rate of roughly 4% of the population. That's not some tiny fringe group. 4% in a large country is millions of people.
Millions. And the impact.
Profound. Devastating. The text says these individuals drain our relationships, our bank accounts, our accomplishments, our self-esteem, our very peace on earth. They're like this constant, often invisible tax on the well-being of everyone else.
Now, when most people hear sociopath or psychopath, their minds probably jump straight to the extremes, right? Violent criminals, serial killers.
The Hannibal Lecter stereotype, yeah.
Exactly. But Lobaczewski's book really emphasizes a far more insidious and frankly more common threat, the larger number of nonviolent sociopaths among us.
These are the ones who aren't necessarily breaking laws in a way that gets them arrested. They're the charming manipulators, the ruthless corporate climbers stepping on everyone, the perpetual victims who somehow always benefit, the chronic liars who never even blink.
And our legal system offers very little defense against them.
Very little, because they operate within the rules or just outside them, exploiting loopholes in human trust and decency rather than statutes.
This is where it gets really profound and, honestly, quite chilling. Lobaczewski draws this direct line.
The psychological correspondence, yeah. He says the internal mechanism, or rather the lack of one, that allows someone to conceive of, say, an ethnic genocide,
Which is almost unthinkable.
is fundamentally the same internal absence that enables someone to, say, guiltlessly lie to one's boss about a coworker to get ahead.
So the scale is different, but the internal void is the same.
Precisely. The common denominator isn't the action's impact, it's the lack of that inner emotional break, that feeling that tells most of us, hey, this is wrong. That's why the same internal vacuum can lead to a petty lie or a monstrous atrocity.
He calls this absence of conscience a deep human division, maybe more significant than intelligence, race, or gender.
Because it dictates how you relate to morality itself, to empathy, to truth. It's fundamental.
So we're talking about a fundamentally different kind of human being here, operating on entirely different internal software almost. That's a radical idea. How do these individuals lacking this essential component of shared humanity actually operate? How do they affect the rest of us? What are their specific characteristics?
Right, and this is where Lobaczewski, building on pioneers like Hervey Cleckley, paints these really vivid, often quite disturbing portraits. Cleckley's work, The Mask of Sanity, described psychopaths often as likable, charming, intelligent, alert, impressive, even confidence-inspiring. They could be socially very successful.
The kind of person you meet at a party and think, wow, they've really got it together.
Exactly. But Cleckley noted, beneath that captivating surface, their emotions are of only the shallowest kind. What would be a horror or a disaster for you or me is, for them, merely a fleeting inconvenience.
Like stubbing your toe versus experiencing deep grief?
Something like that. A profound lack of emotional depth or resonance. It's terrifying when you pair that with charm and intelligence.
And Cleckley found this wasn't rare. He said it was quite common in the community at large.
Yes, with cases including businessmen, doctors, and even psychiatrists. This shatters that stereotype of the killer hiding in the shadows. These individuals can be, and often are, integrated right into the fabric of society, sometimes in positions of power and trust.
Okay, so Lobaczewski distinguishes between the ones who get caught, the criminal psychopaths.
He calls them the unsuccessful psychopaths, yeah. The ones whose impulses or lack of foresight land them in jail.
But the real concern, the bigger source of damage, is the larger group.
Absolutely. The large numbers of psychopaths that live among us who never get caught breaking laws, who don't murder, or if they do, they don't get caught, and who still do untold damage to the lives of family, acquaintances, and strangers. These are the ones eroding trust, exploiting vulnerability, leaving that trail of emotional wreckage without ever facing formal consequences.
And here's another crucial point that really challenges common assumptions. Lobaczewski says psychopathy isn't always caused by, say, a bad childhood or abuse.
Right. While those things can certainly contribute to antisocial behavior, the text suggests psychopathy itself seems to have little overlap with other personality disorders, apart from antisocial personality disorder, and that these individuals are essentially born with different basic likes and dislikes and desires. Born different. Which leads to his chilling conclusion that some are doctors and presidents, and others are petty thieves or rapists. The core difference is inherent. They are, as he puts it, a more or less a different type of human.
A different type of human. That phrase really lands with weight.
It's central to Ponerology. He says they view us from a certain distance, like a paraspecific variety, like we're a slightly different species they're observing.
Like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe.
Kinda, yeah. Our natural human reactions, our empathy, guilt, love, sorrow, these things strike the psychopath as strange, interesting, and even comical. Comical. They observe us, they analyze us, they form their different world of concepts based on their purely logical, non-emotional processing. And in doing so, they become experts in our weaknesses.
And sometimes conduct heartless experiments.
Yes, just to see how we'll react, like poking an anthill.
The book uses that analogy of a cat playing with a mouse, doesn't it? That's deeply disturbing.
It is. The idea that just as normal humans enjoy seeing others happy, the psychopath enjoys the exact opposite. Is this just entertainment for them? Or is it something deeper, maybe even hardwired? A drive to witness distress?
Has science shed any light on this, neurologically?
Well, Robert Hare's research using brain scans offered some fascinating, though maybe preliminary clues. He noted that when psychopaths processed emotionally charged words or images, there was no activation of the appropriate areas for emotional arousal. The lights just weren't on in the emotional centers.
So literally no emotional response.
Apparently not. But interestingly, there was overactivation in other parts of the brain, ordinarily devoted to language. It was as if, Hare theorized, they were analyzing the emotional content purely linguistically, like looking up a word in a dictionary. Sadness. Definition is, okay, got it. Yeah. But no feeling of sadness.
Is cognitive processing.
Yeah.
Analyzing suffering like it's data.
Exactly. Analyzing it in terms of its linguistic or dictionary meaning without the accompanying feeling.
So if their internal world is so different, they must be constantly acting, right? Putting on a mask.
Constantly. Lobaczewski notes they attempt to mask their different world of experience and to play a role of normal people. They learn the social scripts, the right words, the expected facial expressions for empathy or remorse.
But it's just a role.
Always just a role. He stresses that the psychopath is never able to incorporate the worldview of a normal person. They can mimic it, sometimes brilliantly, but they can't internalize our values or feelings. It's always a performance.
And what drives them? What's behind the mask?
According to the text, it's the pursuit of its immediate attractions, moments of pleasure, and temporary feelings of power. Very impulsive, very focused on short-term gratification.
But this path often leads to failure and condemnation, right?
Yes, because they struggle to understand or navigate the rules and expectations of normal society. So it's often this cycle of seeking thrills, getting power, then hitting walls, facing consequences, but never really learning from it in an emotional sense.
Okay, so that's essential psychopathy. But Lobaczewski identifies other types of deviations too, these characteropathies. Let's talk about paranoid character disorders.
Right. These individuals, he says, can seem perfectly reasonable. They maintain relatively correct reasoning and discussion. Until you challenge one of their core beliefs, or even just express a minor difference of opinion, then bam, normal reasoning just stops abruptly. It's like a switch flips, and they become utterly rigid, illogical, defensive.
And they can be influential.
Very. They possess this strange power to enslave less critical minds. Think of young people, or people who are already feeling marginalized or confused. The paranoid individual's absolute certainty can be incredibly magnetic, even if it's based on a completely distorted view of reality. They build followings not through reason, but through this intense, unwavering conviction.
The book gives Lenin as a historical example based on Vasily Grossman's description.
Yes, Grossman noted Lenin could be always tactful, gentle, and polite on the surface, but underneath, excessively sharp, ruthless, and brutal attitude to political opponents.
Never admitting he could be wrong or they could be right.
Never, not even minimally. And he would just unleash these vicious insults: hucksters, lackeys, servant boys, mercenaries, agents, or Judases. The goal wasn't to persuade, but to ridicule and compromise his adversaries. Lobaczewski even suggests Pavlov, the famous psychologist, intentionally crafted his description of this personality type to fit Lenin perfectly.
Okay, then there's frontal characteropathy. This one's linked to brain damage.
Specifically, perinatal damage to his brain's prefrontal fields. So something happening around birth affecting the brain's executive control center, judgment, impulse control, emotional regulation.
And how does that manifest?
These individuals can show infantile features, struggle with insufficient control over his emotions, and develop a somewhat paranoid way of thinking. To compensate, they might overreact instinctively, becoming belligerent, risk-happy, and brutal because their emotional and instinctual responses aren't being properly mediated by the prefrontal cortex.
And the historical example given here is Stalin.
Chillingly, yes. Lobaczewski concludes Stalin fits this profile, likely stemming from that kind of early brain damage. His paranoia about internal enemies was so intense, apparently, that it was impossible to talk to him about that person. Logic or evidence was useless against his conviction.
Kaiser Wilhelm II is also mentioned.
Yes, citing his known birth defect and elements of narcissism. Lobaczewski argues this characteropathy in the leader contributed to a kind of degradation of common sense among many Germans under his rule. The leader's pathology filters down.
Another category is schizoidia. How are they described?
As hypersensitive and distrustful. They tend to assume extreme positions and are quick to retaliate even for minor slights. They have an impoverished psychological worldview, leading them to be typically pessimistic regarding human nature.
And they often feel superior.
Yes, they often consider themselves intellectually superior to ordinary people, looking down on the masses. Lobaczewski even gives some fascinating, if potentially controversial today, demographic estimates from his time suggesting frequency varied across groups, being low among blacks, the highest among Jews, and around 0.7% in Poland. It shows his clinical, almost epidemiological approach.
So it's not just about inherited conditions. He also talks about acquired deviations, right?
Absolutely crucial point. Brain tissue damage later in life, from injuries, toxins, viruses, even side effects of medical treatments like chemotherapy, the so-called chemo head, can also cause character deformation.
How does that fit into the picture?
It diminishes common sense, impairs judgment, and critically makes these individuals more susceptible to the influence of others who have inherited psychological deviations.
So it creates vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just an individual tragedy when someone suffers brain damage. It creates a societal vulnerability. These individuals, with their weakened critical faculties, become easier targets for manipulation by those natural-born psychopaths or other characteropathies. It's another crack in the societal armor that can be exploited.
Okay, so we have these different types of deeply ingrained psychological differences, both inherited and acquired. They aren't just isolated cases, are they?
Not at all. This is where Lobaczewski's work gets truly groundbreaking, moving from individual psychology to societal dynamics. He shows how these different pathologies combine, how they infect each other, how they multiply within societies.
Leading to what he calls ponerogenesis.
Ponerogenesis, literally the genesis, the birth, the origin of evil on a societal scale. This is how we get from individual deviations to large-scale atrocities and oppressive systems.
And he really pushes back against simple moral explanations here.
Strongly. The book argues that simplistic moralizing interpretations of human behavior are not just wrong, they're actively harmful. He says they are erroneous and merely leads to an exceptional number of unfortunate consequences. They poison the human soul and stop us from seeing reality clearly.
His core insight seems to be that pathology isn't the exception in societal evil, it's the rule.
That's it exactly. He states, the participation of various pathological factors in these processes is the rule. The situation where such participation is not noticeable tends to be the exception. This forces a complete rethink. We have to stop looking just for bad apples and start seeing the systemic interactions, the psychobiological factors that are almost always involved.
It's like a network effect.
A complex network, yes. He says moral evil and psychobiological evil are, in effect, interlinked via so many causal relationships and mutual influences. He even compares ponerogenic processes to a complex chemical synthesis, different pathological elements reacting together to create something new and uniquely dangerous.
And it's not always obvious, because cause and effect can be separated by a long time.
Yes, often widely separated in time, which makes it more difficult to track the links.
Okay.
The seeds of a societal crisis might have been sown decades, even generations, before it fully blooms. This makes it look like some sudden, inexplicable catastrophe rather than the predictable outcome of a long-running pathogenic process.
So how does a society become vulnerable? How does this process get started?
Interestingly, Lobaczewski argues our own natural human worldview can be a barrier. Our normal, healthy way of seeing things developed through our own experiences and culture can be neither sufficiently universal nor completely true. It's our default lens, but it can blind us to the truly abnormal.
We project our own normality onto others.
We do. He talks about the egotism of the natural worldview, where we overrate the values of their worldview, behaving as though it were an objective basis for judging other people. And when faced with real horror, something that doesn't fit our normal framework, society often tends to escape into ignorance or naive doctrines. Anything to avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that not everyone operates like us.
And ironically, he suggests that good times, peaceful times, can actually increase this vulnerability.
It's a deeply unsettling idea, isn't it? But he argues that during happy, peaceful times, societies can become complacent. Perception of the truth about the real environment ceases to be a virtue. Critical thinking gets sidelined.
Thoughtful doubters are decried as meddlers. We've all seen that happen.
Absolutely. And this leads to an impoverishment of psychological knowledge across society. People lose the ability or the willingness to engage in sharp moral criticism or psychological analysis. We become intellectually, well, soft.
And this creates a dangerous feedback loop.
A very dangerous one. People develop habits of unconscious elimination of data, which are, or appear to be, inexpedient. We just filter out uncomfortable truths because they disturb our peace.
We don't want to see it.
Exactly. And eventually, this becomes a custom accepted by society at large. This leads to the subconscious substitution of inconvenient premises by more convenient ones, thereby approaching the boundaries of psychopathology. He calls this collective state a historial state. Basically, a societal fear of truth. It's like the whole society chooses to wear blinders.
And the result is predictable.
Tragically predictable. When communities lose the capacity for psychological reason and moral criticism, the processes of the generation of evil are intensified at every social scale until everything reverts to bad times. He sees it as a perennial sickness of societies, this cyclical vulnerability to internal pathological forces taking over when our defenses are down.
Within this cycle, certain tools of Ponerogenesis become active. He talks about Paramoralisms and Spellbinders. What are Paramoralisms?
Think of them as twisted justifications. They are statements and suggestions that cleverly invent ever-new moral criteria for someone's convenience. They're not just simple lies, they're distortions of morality itself.
How do they work?
They cunningly evade the control of our common sense, making us accept or even approve of behavior that is, objectively speaking, openly pathological. They act like a kind of moral anesthetic, numbing our natural sense of right and wrong.
The examples he gives are pretty stark, aren't they?
They are shocking, deliberately so, I think. He mentions instances where child abuse is paramorally affirmed, like a family with brain damage claiming their sadistic treatment of a son showed the mother's exceptionally high moral qualifications.
Wow. Just twisting reality completely.
Completely. Other examples he cites are things like children beaten to death by their parents for religious reasons, circumcision, both for boys and girls, the historical practice of suti in India or in certain cultures, the idea that if a woman is raped, her male relatives must kill her to restore family honor.
These are extreme examples, but they illustrate the point.
Exactly. Lobaczewski finds it hard to believe that they are managed by psychologically normal people, because these justifications require such a profound overriding of natural human empathy and basic morality. They need that pathological twist.
Okay, so paramoralisms provide the twisted justification. What about the spellbinders? Who are they?
These are the active agents, the influencers. They are generally the carriers of various pathological factors themselves, often driven by pathological egotism. They are highly active in swaying others.
They believe their own hype.
Totally. They believe that he will always find converts to his ideology, and most often they are right. They gather followers, often rewarding them, and react to any criticism with intense moral outrage, making themselves seem like the victims.
But crucially, they can't actually foresee the real consequences of their actions.
That's key. Their activities are always necessarily characterized by the inability to foresee its final results, precisely because their thinking is rooted in pathological phenomena. They're self-charming. That absolute conviction in their own righteousness blinds them. They can't see reality clearly enough to predict logical outcomes.
So in a healthy society, these people get shut down.
Usually, yes. Their erratic nature, their inability to deliver results catches up with them. But, Lobaczewski warns, when society is already weakened by injustice, by economic hardship, by poor leadership, then spellbinders can seize the moment. They can lead entire societies into large-scale human tragedy.
Oh.
They effectively fish the environment for people susceptible to their influence, people with their own psychological weaknesses. They draw these people in, deep in their issues, until they form a ponerogenic union, a network bound by shared pathology or susceptibility.
This leads to what he calls the first criterion of Ponerogenesis.
Yes. The atrophy of natural critical faculties with respect to pathological individuals becomes an opening to their activities, and at the same time, a criterion for recognizing the association in concern as ponerogenic. Basically, when a society loses its bullshit detector for pathology, that's the first sign it's on a dangerous path.
And that path can lead to pathocracy.
Pathocracy, a chilling term. He defines it as a system of government, wherein a small pathological minority takes control over a society of normal people. It's not just bad government, it's government by the psychologically deviant, where the pathology itself shapes the system.
And ideology plays a key role in how this happens.
A huge role, but in a twisted way. The process often starts with an existing ideology, maybe even one considered noble or sacred truth. But under ponerogenic influence, it gets contaminated and deformed.
It becomes a caricature.
Exactly. The ideology is caricaturizing the original ideology. It's then used as a vehicle, or Trojan horse, to actually pathologize how people think, both individually and across society. The original name, like socialism or freedom or whatever, is kept, but it becomes a keystone of mistakes because its meaning has been completely inverted.
It's a bait and switch.
A profound bait and switch. The noble words remain, but they now serve a pathological agenda.
And the leadership itself changes over time.
Yes. Initially, you might have characteropathic individuals, people with maybe less severe deviations, adopting ideas created by more doctrinaire, perhaps schizoidal types, and making them active. But as the movement gains traction, the essential psychopaths start moving in. They typically stay away from social organizations characterized by reason and ethical discipline initially. But they're drawn like moths to a flame to movement, preaching revolution and war against that unfair world so foreign to them. Chaos is their element.
So they infiltrate these movements.
They insinuate themselves, often taking on subordinate roles at first, especially doing the dirty work, the things that inspire revulsion in others. Their lack of scruples, their evident zealotry and cynicism actually helps them rise.
A network forms.
An ever-strengthening network of psychopathic and related individuals gradually starts to dominate. And the essential psychopaths, while they might like to stay ostensibly in the shadows, maybe directing small groups, increasingly set the pace, acting as the eminence grise, the hidden power.
Until, in a fully developed pathocracy, the leadership criteria are completely flipped.
Completely inverted. All leadership positions must be filled by individuals with corresponding psychological deviations, which are inherited as a rule. Competence, skills, intelligence, empathy, those become secondary, even liabilities.
What matters is the pathology.
Yes. Their abnormality makes them more valuable to the pathocrats because they fit the system's warped logic. Normal, talented people are actually harder to find who are willing to serve such a system, and they're certainly harder for the pathocrats to trust. The system actively selects for pathology and against normalcy and competence.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanics. How does a pathocracy actually rule and hold on to power? Lobaczewski gives some numbers.
Yeah, estimates from his observations. He figured about 6% of the population are amenable individuals, people easily swayed or corrupted into supporting the system. Within that, maybe 0.6% are essential psychopaths.
So a relatively small core group driving it?
A small core, but that 6% becomes the new nobility, the privileged class. And maybe another 12% people with various minor issues or just skittish opportunism form a new bourgeoisie, gaining economic advantages. This creates a compliant internal structure that benefits from the pathology.
And this ruling group lives in constant fear.
Constant fear. Pathocrats feel permanently threatened by the others, i.e. by the majority of normal people. Their own survival becomes the supreme moral imperative.
Which justifies any action.
Any and all psychological manipulation, political cunning, implemented with a total lack of scruples towards those they see as inferior quality people. The cruelty can be shocking in its depravity.
And they'll even turn on each other, purges.
Absolutely. They will ruthlessly purge its leaders should their behavior jeopardize the existence of such a system. Especially if the leaders seem to be getting soft, maybe wish to go too far in compromising with the society of normal people. Absolute conformity to the pathology is demanded.
Chillingly, war itself can become a tool for them.
A calculated tool. It can serve as an executioner of the common people whose increasing power represents incipient jeopardy for the pathocracy. Get rid of potential threats by sending them to the front lines.
And they don't care about the human cost.
They give short shrift to blood and suffering of people they consider to be not quite conspecific, not quite their own kind. That infamous, chilling line attributed to dictators, "We have a lot of people here," captures that perfectly. Human life is just expendable.
They also use poverty and hardship deliberately.
Yes. Creating scarcity effectively limits the possibility of subversive activities on the part of the society of normal people. Keep people focused on basic survival, and they won't have the time or energy to organize or resist. That's why, Lobaczewski observes, pathocracy invariably brings about food shortages. It's often a deliberate control mechanism, not just incompetence.
But they try to hide their true nature from the outside world.
Oh, absolutely. Despite their internal difference, pathocrats are conscious of being different from normal people, and they become masters at creating a macrosocial mask of the same dissimulating nature. They hide their pathological face from international opinion and live in genuine fear recognition in terms of a true clinical diagnosis. The last thing they want is for the world to understand what they actually are.
This leads to that concept of double talk.
Yes. The official ideology has this acceptable outer layer. Lots of talk about peace, justice, the people, whatever sounds good. But there's an inner distorted meaning known only to the elite, where those same words mean something entirely different, often the opposite.
Like peace means suppressing all dissent.
Exactly. Understanding this dual language is incredibly difficult, a vexatious task for normal people. But Lobaczewski says its very presence is a pathognomonic symptom, a clear, undeniable diagnostic sign of an advanced ponerogenic process. It's a giant red flag that the system is fundamentally pathological.
And this pathology tries to spread.
It radiates, as he puts it. A pathocracy sends out coded news difficult for normal people to understand, but easy to read for psychopathic individuals in other countries. They recognize the signals.
And those individuals see it as
a potential homeland where our dreams about ruling those others can come true. They're drawn to the model, the promise of power without constraint, the validation of their own deviance.
And to protect itself, the pathocracy actively targets genuine reformers.
Viciously. True reformers and moralists, people who could actually expose the pathology and offer a real alternative, could deprive a pathocracy of any chance to take over. So they must therefore be consistently neutralized.
How?
sometimes through propaganda, twisting their motives using liberal or conservative positions and appropriately suggestive catchwords and paramoralisms, smear campaigns, or, if necessary, the best among them has to be murdered. As part of the psychological warfare, eliminate any credible opposition.
Science and knowledge are also suppressed.
Heavily controlled. Scientific papers are monitored, data harmful to the pathocracy is suppressed, specialists are blackmailed or intimidated. The overall quality of science plummets.
And certain fields are especially targeted.
Yes, specifically, depth psychology, the analysis of the human instinctive substratum, together with the study of hereditary factors. Why? Because this knowledge could jeopardize the system itself by pronouncing a dramatic diagnosis of the ruler's own pathology. They can't allow science to accurately describe them.
Psychiatry gets particularly abused, doesn't it?
Horrifically abused. Lobaczewski describes situations where physicians become a psychiatrist after a course of study lasting only weeks. This lets individuals, by nature inclined to serving the pathocratic authority, infiltrate the field.
Leading to
the systematic abuse of psychiatry for political ends. Diagnosing political opponents as mentally ill, locking them up in psychiatric hospitals, it becomes a tool of repression cloaked in medical legitimacy.
This sounds incredibly bleak, like a nightmare you can't wake up from, a society completely consumed by this disease.
It does. It absolutely paints a picture of a descent into something profoundly dark, something very difficult to imagine recovering from. Yet, and this is so important, despite the grim, often terrifying picture he paints, Lobaczewski's work is ultimately fundamentally one of hope.
Hope, after all that.
Yes, because he also reveals how normal people endure, how they adapt, and ultimately how this disease that affects entire nations can actually be overcome.
Okay, so how? Where does the healing begin?
It begins with understanding. That's the absolute core of his message. He uses that old Latin phrase, ignota nulla curatio morbi.
Which means?
Ignorance of the disease, no cure. You can't fix what you don't understand. And he states, quite powerfully, that the mere understanding of the nature of the disease starts curing human minds and souls. Just seeing it clearly is the first step out of the darkness.
So ponerology itself, the study of this, becomes the antidote.
It becomes a revolutionary tool, yes. It clarifies unknown causative links and analyzes the processes of the genesis of evil without giving a short shrift to factors which have so far been underrated, like these pathological influences.
It gives us that naturalistic understanding.
Exactly, something previously only grasped through those often unhelpful, excessively moralistic categories. It lets us move beyond just saying this is evil to understanding the mechanisms, the biological, psychological, social mechanisms at play.
And this understanding opens up new solutions.
Solutions that were previously unthinkable. It allows for, first theoretical and then practical, solutions for problems we have been attempting to solve by ineffective traditional means that often leave us feeling helpless against these huge historical forces.
Like just using force.
Right. He argues traditional approaches often overrate force as a means of counteracting evil. We think we can fight it with weapons alone, but Lobaczewski suggests the real battle, the more effective battle, might be one of understanding.
He calls ponerology a new weapon.
But a very specific kind of weapon. He emphasizes it kills no one. Instead, it's capable of stifling the process of the genesis of evil within a person and activating his own curative powers. It empowers the individual and the collective.
So if societies gain this understanding,
they can effect concerted action based on moral and naturalistic criteria. They can build systems, design policies, foster cultures that are inherently more resilient against this kind of pathological infiltration in the first place.
What's really remarkable, too, is how he describes normal people resisting and adapting even under the absolute worst conditions of pathocracy.
It's incredibly inspiring, actually. He says, after the initial shock, the dehumanization, the overwhelming majority of people begin to manifest their own phenomenon of psychological immunization, like developing antibodies.
They build resilience.
They do. They slowly learn to perceive the weak spots of such a system. They learn how to utilize the possibilities of more expedient arrangement of their lives, finding ways to survive and even thrive subtly within the cracks. And crucially, they regenerate feelings of social links and reciprocal trust among themselves, often in secret.
And there's a kind of inherent superiority of normalcy when it comes to actually building things.
Yes, this is a powerful point. The world of normal people is always superior to the deviant one whenever constructive activity is needed. Whether it's rebuilding a country, advancing technology, organizing an economy, doing real science or medicine.
So even the pathocrats realize they need normal people.
Eventually, yes, they hit a wall. They realize they want to build things, but they can't get much done without us. Their pathology gives them power to destroy and control, but it inherently limits their ability to create, to build, to foster genuine progress.
And incredibly, he suggests that living under oppression can actually lead to unexpected mental development in the normal population.
It sounds counterintuitive, but yes. The necessity for constant mental effort, so crucial for finding some tolerable way of life. The constant need to navigate a hostile, deceptive environment. It actually causes the development of realistic perception, especially in the area of socio-psychological realities.
It's like sharpening your senses.
Exactly. He quotes the idea that human genius is not born of lazy prosperity, but rather stands in perpetual confrontation with a recalcitrant reality. Adversity forces a deeper, more practical understanding of human nature, power dynamics, and psychological manipulation.
People learn the deviant language.
They develop this practical knowledge in the area of how pathocrats think and how such a system of rule operates. Some become so fluent in the deviant language and its idiomatics, they can use it like a foreign language they've mastered.
Which allows them to
decipher the rulership's intentions, to see through the propaganda, the double talk, and understand the real pathological motives behind the official pronouncements. It's a vital form of intellectual and psychological resistance.
So how does pathocracy end? Not necessarily in flames.
Not necessarily a violent revolution, no. Lobaczewski predicts that when the common masses of people want to live like human beings again and the system can no longer resist, what happens is less a counter-revolution and a more or less stormy process of regeneration.
Because pathocracy isn't stable.
It's fundamentally unstable. It's a disease process affecting entire nations and running the course of its characteristic pathodynamic properties. Like any disease, it has a life cycle. It burns itself out, consumes its host, or is eventually overcome by the host's immune response. It's not a viable long-term system.
Now, one of the most radical, maybe challenging ideas in the book for how to break the cycle afterwards is forgiveness.
It's truly radical, isn't it? Especially given the horrors he's described. But yes, he champions the law of forgiveness, that old law of wise sovereigns. He sees it as potentially more effective than punishment in some situations, rooted in profound moral and psychological foundations.
What's the basis for this forgiveness? It's not about excusing the actions, is it?
Not at all about excusing. It stems from recognizing the psychological causation governing a person while committing evil. He draws a parallel to how modern law already mitigates sentences for people with clear mental illness.
So extend that understanding to these inherited psychological anomalies.
That's his argument. We should not fault anyone for having inherited some psychological anomaly. We should acknowledge the biological reality of their condition, separate from judging the actions that resulted from it. It's a clinical perspective, not a moral absolution.
Understanding, not excusing.
Precisely. And this act of forgiveness, which he calls unprecedented in history, he believes is justified by nature itself. Psychologically, it helps us, the normal population, control our own instincts, vindictive reflexes, that powerful urge for revenge.
Which can be destructive in itself.
Exactly. It protects our own minds from those harmful, moralizing interpretations and frees up the immense energy that would otherwise be consumed by hatred and retribution. It allows society to take over power and liberate the internal talents which could ensure a nation's return to normal life.
It demands a huge shift, though, accepting the biological facts without emotional judgment.
A profound shift. It requires society to accept biological and psychological facts, renouncing any morally or emotionally charged judgment of individuals whose congenital factors make them participate in ponerogenesis.
Okay, so beyond forgiveness, what does he envision for building a new social system, one resistant to this happening again?
He has some groundbreaking ideas. One is the Council of Wise Men, a proposed institution composed of several people with extremely high general, medical, and psychological qualifications. Their job, to have the right to examine the physical and psychological health of candidates before the latter are elected to the highest government positions.
Like a pre-election psychological screening for leaders.
Essentially, yes. A built-in preventative measure. A way to diagnose and hopefully neutralize the seeds of pathology before they can take root at the highest levels of power.
It's about building systemic resistance.
Exactly. A future social system must be designed to be more resistant to the danger of having macrosocial pathological phenomena develop within. The foundation needs to be an improved development of the psychological worldview across society better social connections, and a widespread scientific and social consciousness of the essence of such phenomena. We need a society that understands the threat and builds immunity.
So, after a pathocracy falls, don't just improvise.
Definitely not. Don't just revert to old ways or stumble into something new. The goal should be to build a system that is deliberately different from and better than anything which existed earlier, based on a realistic vision of a better future, informed by this scientific understanding of human nature and how Ponerogenesis